Hello and welcome to Managing Editor Live. And I'm here with my old boss and close friend, Jim Barrett, talking about how to be a content boss. I wanted Jen to kick off Managing Editor Live because she's a career role model. I mean, I worked with her at CNBC Digital. She had a scrappy team. She was super ambitious. She left for Acorns, and I won't summarize Jen's career because I really want you to hear it directly from her. And so, first off, welcome Jen to Managing Editor Live,
Thanks
and
so much.
and can you just share with our audience what could you describe your career journey, because I find it
Sure.
really interesting.
Sure. And thanks so much for having me. And thank you for the kind intro, Tom. I will say that I had a great team at CNBC. It was scrappy, but very talented, which helps. So my career, I would say it has been winding. It's exciting and not what I had planned, which I would imagine probably describes a lot of you in content. So I'll tell you a story because thinking back on my career, there was one moment that became a real turning point in my career, or a wake-up call, and really shifted the whole trajectory of my career. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Texas. My parents used to get Newsweek magazine in our house, and when I was probably 13 or 14, I actually picked up the issue and read it. And I thought, wow, I liked writing at the time. And I thought, wait a second, you can get paid to write. You can get paid to learn about things you want to learn more about. You can get paid to interview really interesting people and to travel and all these things. So pretty early on, I decided I wanted to be a journalist, probably early in my high school years. And not only that, but I had this very clear vision of, I am going to get to New York. I am going to work for Newsweek. I want to work my way up to senior writer, because that was the title I'd seen on some of the more interesting articles. And then I'm going to write books. And that was my whole plan. And so I did make it to Newsweek in 2001 after about a year and a half of trying to get hired there. And then I was about 6 years in, and I was now general editor at the magazine, and was out on maternity leave, but also working on my first book, which I co-authored. And so it was sort of like, check, 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 and I thought I was all set. But the one thing that I really hadn't counted on was the possibility that Newsweek might go under. That was not even something that had been in the realm of possibilities. It didn't even occur to me till I came back from maternity leave. And I can remember this one meeting that we were in where the publisher came in, the editor-in-chief came in, and they put up a slide that I will never forget, because it really foretold what was going to happen across journalism in the coming years. And it was a chart that showed print ad revenue starting like right about here and then going like straight down. And then it showed digital ad revenue way down at the bottom of the chart, slowly coming up. And I looked at where they crossed and I thought, good God, that's like 50% or more drop from where we are right now with print ad revenue. And I remember going home that night and saying to my husband, like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm not sure that Newsweek's going to survive. And the thing was, I had no plan B. Like, this had been my career path. And so really in a moment's time, two things became very clear. One, I couldn't wed my career to Newsweek. And two, I had always sort of held print up as like the holy grail. Like, I'd been hired on the digital side, but I was constantly trying to get into the magazine and work on these cover packages. And I suddenly realized, wait, I'm trying to go this direction, and our audience is going the other direction. Like, the larger trend is actually going in the other direction to digital. So I have two choices here. I can dig in and insist on writing print and eventually become possibly obsolete, or I can lean into digital. I can ride this wave instead of being caught underneath it. And so not long after, I took a job as a digital director of a women's health site. And I've essentially been on the digital and the management path ever since. But the big lesson that I learned from that was that, number one, you have to be nimble. But number two, you can't be too attached to a particular employer, to a particular job, to a particular path, because in our industry in particular, it is dynamic, it is evolving, and if you don't evolve with these trends, you risk being left behind. So that was a really big lesson I learned, and then I sort of carried that forward, as my career progressed. Like I was sort of looking ahead, like where are we going? Where's the direction that we're going now, and how can I make sure that I'm oriented toward that direction?
Can you talk about the next transition point? And I think I was there for a little bit of that. Is your transition from you're a successful journalist and then you transition to the startup world, to content marketing, really full force. Can you talk about that and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I moved into management about 13 years ago. So that was kind of the first transition for me because I wasn't like in it anymore. I wasn't writing as much and researching and doing interviews and doing journalism. I mean, I still and will always be a journalist at heart, but I was a little bit further removed from the actual work at that point. So that was kind of the first step in that direction. And moving into management, and eventually I became a GM at Hearst Digital. What that did was give me a broader perspective too. So I really started to understand how the business worked. What were the business objectives? But more than that, I was kind of obsessed with content consumption habits overall, because I was constantly saying, like, how can we evolve? How do we stay ahead of this? And we had KPIs and we had all sorts of things now that I was accountable for. And I was pretty determined I was going to stay on the management track, but I wanted to stay in editorial publishing. I really had no interest initially in moving to a brand. But I'll tell you what happened was, we were at CNBC together. And by that point, I'd been in financial journalism for a while. And I started to feel like we were writing a lot of the same headlines over and over and over again. And like the reason I went into journalism in the first place was I was really convinced that, if you could inspire and inform people, they could make better choices and you could have a really big impact on their life. And it's one reason why I've always sort of leaned toward health or personal finance, because both of those areas, if you're proactive, if you make smart choices, it can have a really profound impact on your quality of life. So I was always drawn to those, but I found it really frustrating after a while that we were writing the same headlines about like 40% of Americans can't pay a $400 emergency bill. Yeah. And then like we're on the brink of this retirement crisis. And it was sort of the same headlines over and over again. And, and at the time I was using Acorns and it was something we'd been writing about. And I thought, wow, they have a really elegant solution, I think, for one of the big challenges that we have in this country, which was that a lot of Americans don't invest, or they wait too long to invest. And then they fall short at retirement, or they don't have the money they need for some of the big goals in their lives. And they had sort of solved that in a way by simply rounding up your change. It takes away the risk. It means that you don't need a lot of money to get in and start investing. And they created these portfolios that really kind of aligned with all the advice we were giving about diversifying your portfolio and investing in funds and, low-cost funds and all of these things. So I already sort of had it on my radar. But I think what really drew me was the Noah, who's the CEO now. At the time, he was the chief strategy officer. When he reached out to me, he reached out through a friend, and he said, if you come here, you can build this financial literacy site from scratch. He's like, you can build it. I want you to build it and scale it. It will be focused on financial wellness, financial literacy. We are committed to education. And I knew it was attached to a brand, but financial literacy is such a passion of mine anyway. And I sort of thought, this will be really interesting to test me when I don't have like the resources of a big organization. Like, what does it actually take to just literally start from nothing and build something up? And so I joined Acorns in November 2015, and I ended up, eventually moving into the chief education officer role there, which was really interesting because it was about how do you integrate educational content into the experience and starting to think about that. And what really was exciting to me was, as a journalist, you put something out there and you want it to have an impact. You hope it has an impact. And every once in a while, someone reaches out on social, or, you get some feedback from someone. But a lot of times you just put it out there in the ether and you don't really know what kind of impact you have. And when we had educational experiences in the app or on the site, we were actually able to track, like, did it have an impact? Did people put more money into their investment accounts? Did they set up regular investments? Did it actually drive action? And of course, it's aligned with a brand. The brand, it's a business. It's not a nonprofit. But it was really fascinating to literally see the impact that your content could have.
Interesting. And all this time, or you were in leadership at a startup, and you managed toward the end of your time there to write a book. Can you talk about that process? How did that, you're a dynamo. How did that come together?
I appreciate that. It was not easy. I will say that to anyone who's written a book knows this, and anyone who's thinking about writing a book. It's not easy. It takes time. I first had the idea for this book. It's called Think Like a Breadwinner, but I first had the idea for it like 7 years ago, and started writing the outline then. And it took a long time to get from that outline to actually putting together a 100-page book proposal and getting it sold at the end of 2019. And I think it really took not just determination, but it really meant like I had to get my family's buy-in. I really had to get them kind of enrolled in this idea, like this book is really important to me. And so they kind of protected my time. And, I would work on the weekends, I would work at night. And then I joined a writing group, and that really gave me the accountability I needed. So I had other people who were working on books, and we were sort of checking in with each other. How are you doing? How are you doing? Are you getting there? Have you hit this goal? And having that accountability really helped. And then I sold it, which was great. And I got an advance. And then when I had the advance, I was able to then go back. Fortunately, I'd been at the company long enough that I could go back and say, I'm going to need to cut my hours a little bit to work on this and take some time away. And because the book was pretty well aligned, I think, with the mission of the company, and the CEO saw it as a plus for me to publish this book, I was able to take that time. I know that's not always easy for anyone, but it's worth asking. So I asked, and we worked out a schedule where I was able to finish the book over 2020.
Excellent. Well, as you know, like, I bought the book for my wife, and you graciously signed it, and 30 attendees at Managing Editor Live will receive a copy of it. But I wanted to know, and it gets back to what you were saying about CNBC, is like sometimes you feel like there are only 15 personal finance stories out there, and you're recycling the same things. And what I love about this book is that it has a different message. But rather than me trying to summarize the message, like, what is the one thing you want people to get out of this book that, in terms of how they can make better decisions about their financial lives?
Yeah. I think, probably the most important message is to think of yourself not just as a wage earner, but as a wealth builder. That was a big transition for me. As I started out kind of living paycheck to paycheck. And it was a shift in my mindset when I started thinking about building wealth. And, the way I put it sometimes when I talk to people about this is that, you want to think of every paycheck as an opportunity to become less dependent on your next paycheck. So think of every paycheck as an opportunity to become less dependent on your next paycheck. And that just means when you have a check coming in, you think about what is the most I can take out of this check and start like putting to work for me. Put some in a high yield savings account, some in an investment account. And that way your money is growing at the same time that your career is growing. And you will get to the point where you are increasingly less dependent on your paycheck. That's important anyway. That's truly, that you get to retirement, or that's true freedom when you get to a point where you could actually live off, the returns of your investments. But it's not just about the money, because what I found was when I was living paycheck to paycheck, when I was in the point where I was like, I can't miss one single check, that will really throw me over. I was showing up differently at work. I was showing up differently in my career because I was so scared of losing my job or ticking anybody off or I wasn't showing up as powerfully. And the more that I was building the wealth on the side and less dependent on the check, and the more confident I became in my skills, I had more confidence to speak up and to show up fully and to show up more powerfully. And I think building those investments on the side actually plays a really big part in that. I mean, yes, you're building your skills at the same time, but it's knowing that you could actually walk away from a job and you'll be okay financially. That's really powerful. And it does impact the way that you show up on a daily basis.
Excellent. So the title of this talk is Think Like a Content Boss, and you are a content boss. So another inflection point in your career that you haven't talked about is the next chapter of the story. You're at Acorns. Why a high flying startup? It's grows a hit. You've built up a reputation. Why move over to Fidelity? Can you talk about that, like that transition?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And like other things in my career, like I hadn't planned on joining Acorns until, it was on my radar. I was attracted to the company, the opportunity presented itself. And I think the same thing sort of happened with Fidelity. And again, what I've realized in my career is you can't be wedded to a company or a job or a particular career path. You want to be nimble, but what you can stay wedded to is your values and the impact that you want to have and the kind of work you want to do. It just may not look exactly like what you thought it was going to look like. So in the case of Fidelity, it had been about 2.5 months after the book came out this spring, and I had sort of finished the virtual book tour and the press was dying down a little bit, and a recruiter reached out and we started talking. And at first I was like, oh, hell no. Like, I'm not going to some big corporate job. I don't want to do like some 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or, whatever job and be in an office every day. But then I started talking to them more and more. And number one, what was interesting was like my impression of what Fidelity was and what this job would be was just completely wrong. Like I'm working remotely. We will probably go to a hybrid situation, but I'm based in New York and my boss is in Boston and my boss's boss is in Providence, Rhode Island. So I don't foresee a time when we're going to be in an office 5 days a week, right? So that was sort of thrown out the window. And then Fidelity is very family friendly. And I just wasn't used to that in my career. I mean, I remember times when I had to hide the fact that I had kids or that I had to pick a kid up from for a doctor's appointment. I would just say it was mine because I was really sensitive to the fact that someone might think that I was not committed to my job. And I think that generally, the ethos in our culture has really changed around that. But it was refreshing to sort of see that at Fidelity, that you are really like a whole human being and your job, there's a recognition that your job is important, but it's not the only thing in your life. And then it was that even in a company with, they have more than 55,000 employees, which is like still hard to get my head around. And I was the 75th employee at Acorns. There were 350 when I left. So this was a bit of a jump. But I found that you could do startup kind of work within Fidelity too, which was really interesting. Like they have a lot of money. It's a big place. You've got a lot of resources, but they also have a culture where you can kind of test and iterate. They've kind of moved to an agile process. So they in many ways, there are, departments within the company like content that operate a little bit more like a startup, which is really appealing. But the biggest factor for me was that they have 35 million individual investors at Fidelity. Wow. 35 million. And
that's crazy.
Isn't it crazy? And I was thinking to myself, I actually remember because I did this leadership coaching program and I had a mentor coach through that program. And I stayed in touch with her and I called her and I said, I don't know what I want to do next, but I know I want to have really massive impact. Having impact is really important to me, and financial literacy is really important. And I don't know how those two are going to cross, but that's a real passion of mine. And then this job appeared and I thought 35 million individual customers, and they're adding millions more every year. Like this is actually the opportunity to have massive impact, So if you think about raising the level of financial literacy, this company has the resources to make a difference there. Creating content that will be seen on a massive scale. We have the opportunity to do that there. I think if they didn't recognize the importance of content and we didn't have the resources, it would be less attractive. But ultimately, having the opportunity to have that kind of impact was, I couldn't turn that down.
I get it. And you have resources. You have a 60+ team. We're just talking about it. You almost have a football team of content marketers. Can you talk about your workflow and how you manage so many people with a hybrid work model?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been fortunate, and all of you are probably well aware of this too. I mean, because of the pandemic, we all went virtual and we realized, oh, wow, you can actually be quite productive virtually. You can still connect with people on Zoom or whatever platform you're using. And you can build those relationships and you can be pretty productive. And so, Fidelity, the team had been doing that already before I got there. And so we were already kind of over that hump. So that helps. But I will say that Fidelity likes to have a lot of meetings. It's a very collaborative culture, which is great. The flip side is we have a lot of meetings, and probably even more because of Zoom. It's just easy to click from one meeting to another. But I think, my team is, and this is probably true of a lot of big companies, the content team actually encompasses a few different teams. So we've got a more traditional kind of editorial team, thought leadership and editorial. We actually have a dedicated education team. They're working on content that is more like progressive curriculums, interactive, modular curriculums, where your progress is tracked and rewarded. So that's a very kind of specific mandate that they have. And then I have a ton of UX content strategists. And so we work really closely. I meet regularly with the head of UXD or design. I meet regularly with the head of UXR or UX research, and we talk a lot about how to simplify the overall user experience. And we have a lot of big projects going on right now. I think, generally, I think there's a recognition at Fidelity and a lot of places that, content is moving very quickly and a lot of companies are playing catch up. And so we're sort of set up, or we were when I got there, to create a lot of long form content and some videos and webinars. And now we are expanding the team so that we can produce a much wider array of content that sort of keeps up with content consumption trends and can appeal to a much broader audience. So, more infographics, interactive content, short form content, modular content, more video, social, creating content specifically for TikTok and different social platforms. We have a podcast. So, and all of that sort of falls, within this team, which is super exciting. And then on the UX side, we are really thinking about how can we talk about money in a much more conversational way, and make the experience much simpler. So we've got, a lot of different work streams happening at the same time, but I think they're all sort of working toward the same goal, which is just how can we better connect with people? How do we make the experience simpler and easier and make education fun? They're all sort of the same common goals, but we're hitting it from multiple angles at the same time, which is exciting and keeps me really busy too.
When you're producing so many different forms of content, how do you, and this is a question from Lisa, how do you determine what content is making the impact that you want?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of measures for that. And I think, this is true at other companies as well. We have an engagement to action ratio that we measure. So there are actions that you can take on different pages. For example, if you're on fidelity.com. We did something similar at Acorns too, where we could track, especially in the app, you can track where people go after they've interacted with your content. And so, when I think about content, I think every piece of content should have a purpose, right? And from a business perspective, we're thinking about how do we attract new audiences? And that means putting content in places where those audiences are, because they're surely not coming to fidelity.com to get the content. We partner with The Skin, we partner with Morning Brew, we create podcasts, we're out there on social, we're partnering with influencers because you have to meet them where they are. And then, we want to acquire customers. So it's not just a matter of attracting them to the content, but eventually bringing them into the Fidelity experience and making sure that matches the kind of experience that they've had with the content initially. So we have to create content all the way through that's conversational, that's inviting, that's accessible. We have content that's designed to deepen engagement. And then, as you asked, we look at whether that engagement turns to action. And that can be either, do we lower call volume So if we're thinking about addressing the questions that we know customers have, we need to make it as simple as possible for people to find those answers. And the way we measure that is, are we lowering call volume? Are people giving us a thumbs up, thumbs down on whether it was helpful? So there are a lot of little ways like that that you can actually measure the impact. Or, what action are they taking next? Are they opening an account? Are they researching stocks? Are they reading other content? Are they signing up for a newsletter? And we literally measure all of those things. I have KPIs against all of them. And so we're really focused on the impact in terms of action. The broader impact, in terms of financial literacy, that's something we're thinking about when it comes to education. How can you measure someone's financial literacy, their confidence, those kind of things? And that's a little bit different than the business objectives. Excellent.
And Emily B has a question, and that is, with all this content, how do you manage development and distributions? What tool are you using? And I love this question for Jen because she's very, very tech savvy. It's one of the fun things about working with her. So what's in your tech stack in terms of measuring impact and content development?
Well, it's interesting because it's a little bit, we have a centralized publishing system, so we're very lucky. And I was actually surprised when I got here, I was actually in a meeting with our head of central publishing just before this. And she was telling me about the role they play in getting some of our content published. And I was shocked because I'm so used to my teams doing most of that work and putting things into the CMS and even doing, some basic HTML. So we're going to move more towards that, I think, in the future there. But we do have a central publishing team, so they help a lot. We have a CMS that's getting a major upgrade, hopefully in the next few months. We use a lot of different tools, sort of depending on the content. I mean, because we're publishing not just to fid.com, but we have several apps. We have the flagship app, we have Spire, we have different products that are sort of under the Fidelity umbrella. And then we have social, and we have a social team that I think has just more than quadrupled in size in the last 6 months. So our capabilities there are much broader than they ever were. That may not answer quick. We have a full suite of tools, but some of them are custom, so it's not as applicable. Gotcha. But yeah.
Do you have a favorite? And then I'll move on to Kara's question about how your team's broken down. Do you have a favorite tool, like any favorite tech that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question to answer because I think we're always looking at new technology. So, for example, we have 2 vendors coming in this week that we're looking at. And so I think I'm not wedded in particular to one particular technology because our needs are always evolving, right? And if they can't evolve with us, then we'll move somewhere else. And a lot of times we do, and we're fortunate because it is a huge company. We have a lot of resources that we do have a lot of custom tools that we've developed too. We have an incredible, tech team. They've laid APIs, we're doing personalization, and that's all internal work. We're not depending on an external vendor for a lot of that stuff.
Excellent. And we only have like a minute or so left, and I want to get to Kara's question. I mean, I think a lot of the audience has team envy with 60 people. Everybody's like, man, if I had 60
70.
people, what would it? 70 people.
And growing. We're hiring. So if you're interested, check out Fidelity Careers and hit me up. We're going to hire more than a dozen new people. Yeah.
But how is the team broken down? Is it by beats? Is it by content format? Could you talk a little bit about that in our last minute or so?
Yeah, I mean, we do have these right now I have 15 direct reports, but we're reorganizing the team a little bit. So we'll cut that down a bit. But so we have an editorial team. It is a more traditional kind of editorial team. They have beats to some degree, but we have some people who are kind of floaters who are GA, and I don't think that's unusual. We have that education team. So they are really dedicated to delivering education and having an impact there and measuring that impact. That's very specific. And then we have content strategists who are working on everything from like the onboarding flow to when we release a new app, they're doing all the copy for that. And more than the copy, they're actually like helping to design the page and doing, they're thinking about the architecture and the hierarchy of words, and really, goes well beyond putting words on a page. And there's some education that happens there, I think, with some of our business partners, but we're making really big strides there. So we have like a full suite of content services. And then we're about to stand up a center of excellence, a content center of excellence. We're hiring for that. And we have content services that help support what we're doing. But it is a broad and multifaceted team that is really driven by, I think everyone there loves words, loves creating content, wants to have an impact, feels really passionate, super smart, and that kind of connects everybody, even though we're working on a lot of different projects at any given time.
Excellent. Well, Jen, one more question before we go, and then
Sure.
we'll keep it quick.
No,
and
fine.
This is a great question from Carol. What advice do you have for a one-person content marketing team?
I think it's very hard when you are a one-person content marketing team, and I feel your pain, because at Acorns we were quite scrappy, especially at the beginning. I would say lean on the tools. There are so many tools available right now, and get yourself some freelancers, and make sure you've got not just freelancers to write straight editorial content, but you've got an SEO person. That's key. And then I would sit down and actually look at what you need in order to be set up for success. Get that down on a sheet of paper and think about the resources that you need, and then present that to your boss in terms of, maybe it's not a full-time person, but getting those resources even on a contract basis, because trying to do it all yourself is really, really hard. And it won't set you up for success.
All right. Advice from the biggest content boss I know. Thank you so much. If you have questions, email me. Let's hear what Mandy's doing at Uberflip. Thank you so much, Jen. Really appreciate it. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here. Take care.